Theories of emotion. American psychologists William James and Danish psychologist Carl Lange were responsible for developing one of the earliest significant theories of emotion. Although they did not work together, they published works with similar views on emotional responses only a couple years apart from each other. James described the theory saying, "My theory is that the bodily changes follow directly the perception of the exciting fact, and that our feeling of the same changes as they occur is the emotion. Common sense says, we lose our fortune, are sorry and weep, we meet a bear, are frightened and run, we are insulted by a rival and are angry and strike. The hypothesis here to be defended says that this order of sequence is incorrect, and that the more rational statement is that we feel sorry because we cry, angry because we strike, afraid because we tremble. Without the bodily states following on the perception, the latter would be purely cognitive, informed, pale, colorless, destitute of emotional warmth. We might then see the bear and judge it best to run, receive the insult and deem it right to strike, but we should not actually feel afraid or angry." Lange agreed almost entirely with James' theory, although in his theory he added that vasomotor changes are the emotions. Both James and Lange disagreed with the order of events proposed by the common sense theory. In the common sense theory, a stimulus is presented and then there is an emotional feeling followed by physiological arousal and behavioral responses. The James-Lange theory argues that after a stimulus is presented, then physiological arousal and behavioral responses happen. It states that the type of physiological arousal and behavioral responses we experience tell us what emotion we are experiencing rather than having those responses as a result of our emotions. In 1871, Walter Cannon was born into an academic environment that always encouraged his curiosity to learn. He attended Harvard Medical School starting in 1896 and graduated with his medical degree 4 years later. Immediately following his graduation, Cannon began working at Harvard on research, but became a professor shortly thereafter. During Cannon's long career in the medical field, he was credited a list of contributions. These include the research and coining of the term fight or flight, being one of the only researchers at the time to use salts of heavy metals to improve X-ray images. He substantially developed the idea of homeostasis, and of course, his extensive work studying human emotion. Philip Bard. Born in 1898, he was always an ambitious person, especially when it came to his academia. He attended Princeton starting in 1923 and graduated from Harvard Medical School with a PhD in 1927. Bard's work was focused on the functions of the nervous system, vestibular system, and motion sickness. He especially developed our understanding of the relationship between the brainstem and emotional excitement. Bard served as president of the American Psychology Society for 5 years, from 1941 to 1946. However, his most notable work was with Cannon involving their theories about human emotion. The Cannon-Bard theory was developed because Cannon and Bard thought that the James-Lange theory couldn't be correct based on a few reasons. They believed that most emotions were accompanied by physiological responses that were too similar for the body to identify specifically. For example, most emotions you can think of are usually paired with an increase in heart rate. They also believed that it would take too long for the body to decide which emotion to feel, especially since it seems emotions and physical reactions appear simultaneously. Finally, they couldn't figure out why the body would have these physiological reactions during other activities such as during a workout. The James-Lange theory would imply that the body should feel some emotion whenever the heart rate increased, but exercise doesn't induce any specific emotion. The Cannon-Bard theory of emotion basically states that the physiological reaction and the emotional reaction occur at the same time, rather than one after the other. The theory suggests that when the stimulus is presented to an individual, the thalamus sends two signals at the same time, one to the cortex, which produces whichever emotion is appropriate for the situation, and one to the sympathetic nervous system to cause the corresponding physiological reactions. While Cannon and Bard assumed that bodily responses had no effect on the emotion a person feels, there have been studies that strongly suggest otherwise. There is one study where people are pumped full of adrenaline and told that they would feel nothing. However, when the subjects were left in a room alone with a person acting out a certain emotion, the subject would attribute the increase in heart rate to whichever emotion that they were presented with. Therefore, they could select which emotion they believed they were feeling based on what they saw paired with a physiological change. This indicates that Cannon and Bard may have been mistaken about the two reactions being completely unrelated to one another. Another problem with the basis of this theory is that, while developing their theory, the duo used animals and case studies as evidence. There is a strong argument that these strategies may not be able to generalize human behaviors. Finally, modern psychologists also have problems with this theory because emotions can come from parts of the brain other than the thalamus, but the work done by Cannon and Bard refers to the thalamus exclusively. Both James-Lange and Cannon-Barr discuss how the importance of both physiological arousal and the emotion elicited in discussing emotions. They are also similar in the fact that neither of them discuss the cognitive component of the emotion. That is, the brain does not do any understanding on how or why an emotion happens. Rather, the emotion is purely elicited without cognitively understanding it. At the same time, James-Lange and Cannon-Barr are different in several aspects as well. First of all, the timing of arousal and emotion are very different in the two theories. James-Lange suggests that we feel aroused, and as a result of the physiological arousal, the emotion is elicited. Cannon-Barr suggests that the two are independent effects that happen at the same time. Furthermore, the two theories are different in their consideration of how the brain affects emotions. William James argued that there were either special centers for cerebral processes that accompany emotion, or that the emotions occurred in the ordinary motor and sensory centers of the cortex, whereas Cannon-Barr had a better understanding of the tangible physiological structures of the brain and how they impact emotions. Finally, James-Lange suggests that the emotion is a direct result of the arousal, whereas Cannon-Barr suggests that the two are completely independent and come from different parts of the brain. There are advantages and disadvantages of both theories. James-Lange could explain how panic disorders or phobias work, where the physiological arousal could directly lead to emotions explaining these disorders. Additionally, James-Lange incorporates the arousal and understands the impact that it has on emotions. However, weaknesses of James-Lange range from how it does not address how different emotions can be felt with similar physiological stimuli to how emotion could be elicited even with the removal of physical stimuli. At the same time, Cannon-Barr properly incorporates physiological structures and understands their impact on emotions properly. Additionally, Cannon-Barr addresses how people can feel different emotions when they are experiencing similar physiological arousal. However, Cannon-Barr fails to address the cognitive component of an emotion, and Cannon-Barr also cannot explain the fact that when the physiological component is no longer present, the emotion elicited is the same but weaker. Besides these two popular theories of emotion, there are many others. The first and most obvious one is called the common sense theory, which implies that upon stimulus, we experience an emotion which triggers physical responses. Say, for example, you are in the woods and see a bear. You then feel fear, and finally, you begin to tremble and sweat. The common sense theory, while easily imagined, is not a proven explanation. There is also the Schachter-Singer theory, also known as the two-factor theory. This model explains that people, when stimulated by the environment, react physiologically. After doing so, they evaluate their situation and attempt to label the cause of these feelings via an emotion. This emotion is then felt. This model is the third most accepted theory of emotion after the James-Lange and Cannon-Barr models. In 1991, Richard Lazarus built a theory which suggested that emotions were decided after thoughts and evaluation on a situation. This theory is called the cognitive appraisal theory. He thought that there were immediate and unconscious appraisals which help mediate between the stimulus and response. He also believed in primary and secondary appraisals, which establish the significance of an event and the ability of the individual to cope, respectively. The study of emotions and what causes them was spurred long ago, dating back to Charles Darwin and William James. They believed in what is called the facial feedback theory. The facial feedback theory proposes that emotions are directly linked to the muscles in the face, which could explain why in the service industry, faking a smile can lead to actual happiness and genuine kindness toward customers. Charles Darwin also believed in what is called the evolutionary theory. He posited that emotions were necessary to survival. If, say, for instance, you are in a dangerous situation like a burning house, this stimulus results in fear, which results in the release of adrenaline, which in turn could lead to a speedier escape. Darwin also thought that being able to read emotions was equally important to survival. If a predator is hissing, roaring, baring its teeth, etc., it is safe to assume that they are going to attack you and you should leave, a key survival strategy. While there are many possible explanations for why we have and feel emotions, psychologists and scientists are still unsure as to which is the most valid.